a magnitude 9.0 earthquake strikes off the coast of Japan. Skyscrapers sway, roads crack, and entire communities are shaken to their foundations. Then, as the dust settles, a second threat emerges. A monstrous tsunami wave is racing towards the Japanese coastline. This is the story of the Great East Japan Earthquake and the race to save the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. At 2:46 p.m. on Friday, March 11, 2011, a tectonic plate beneath the Pacific Ocean suddenly shifted, releasing an immense amount of energy. What followed was a magnitude 9.0 earthquake, the strongest ever recorded in Japan's history and the fourth largest in the world this century. For more than 6 minutes, the earth trembled violently along a 500-kilometer fault line. People rushed outside in panic, unsure if the ground would split beneath their feet. Walls and windows shattered as buildings swayed dangerously. Cars skidded and collided on roads that buckled and split. The quake's violent shaking caused billions of dollars in damage across Japan. In the northeastern city of Sendai, tall buildings were reduced to rubble and entire neighborhoods were washed away by powerful aftershocks. Closer to the epicenter, the ocean floor rose sharply, displacing a massive amount of seawater. A gigantic tsunami wave was born. But 180 kilometers from the epicenter in Okumagunma Prefecture, everything seemed relatively calm. From the shore, the sea had receded dramatically, exposing a vast expanse of seabed. Moments later, however, distant roars reached the town. On the horizon, a wall of water was rising. Seconds later, the waves slammed ashore, estimated at between 14 and 15 meters high. Homes were swept away, roads were obliterated, and entire communities were vanished in an instant. The total death toll of the tsunami will never be known, but nearly 20,000 people lost their lives in the disaster, many never to be found. Within the walls of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant, however, the full extent of the tragedy was yet to unfold. To understand what happened next, we must take a step back. Japan relies heavily on nuclear energy to meet its electricity demands. As of 2011, 30% of the country's energy came from nuclear sources. The Fukushima Daiichi plant, situated on the coast of the Pacific Ocean, is one of 54 nuclear reactors spread throughout Japan. Built in the 1970s, it comprises several interconnected structures housing 6 boiling water reactors, each capable of generating 7 to 8% of Japan's total electricity output. Like other nuclear plants worldwide, Fukushima's reactors utilize controlled fission reactions to generate heat, which produces steam to drive turbines that generate electricity. Multiple safety systems and redundancies are built into the design to prevent accidents. And in the event of a disaster, the reactors are surrounded by robust containment structures to prevent the release of radioactive materials. And so when the earthquake struck on March 11th, the plant's systems automatically initiated shutdown procedures. Control rods were inserted into the reactor core to stop the fission reactions. The chain reactions were halted, but as the plant staff realized the true scale of the disaster unfolding, the gravity of the situation became clear. The tremors had damaged the plant's external power supply. Reactors 1 through 4 had lost all electrical power. Their backup batteries would soon run out, meaning the cooling systems that circulated water through the reactors to remove excess heat would cease functioning. Without power, the heated fuel rods would begin to melt, potentially melting through the reactor vessels and igniting fires that could release massive amounts of radioactive material into the environment. When the tsunami struck the plant, it exacerbated the crisis. Flooding destroyed roads, knocked out remaining backup generators, and inundated the basements where emergency diesel generators were housed. With all electrical power gone and the cooling systems failing, the race was on to prevent a meltdown. Reactor 1 was the most at risk. Water temperature sensors indicated that the fuel rod S-cladding was degrading and radioactive materials were leaking into the containment vessel. Time was running out. Inside the control room, a team of engineers led by Masao Yoshida worked frantically to restore power. Elsewhere, other teams tried to manually vent steam from the reactor's primary containment vessel. Incredibly, these heroic efforts managed to stabilize the situation temporarily. But the crisis was far from over. Workers needed a way to cool the fuel rods long-term without electricity. They needed a miracle. As engineers struggled to avert disaster at the plant, the rest of Japan grappled with the aftermath of the earthquake and tsunami. 45,000 people were missing. Rescue workers used helicopters and bulldozers to search for survivors amidst the debris. Aftershocks continued to batter the region, hampering rescue operations. Hospitals were overwhelmed with injured patients. The government declared a nationwide state of emergency. But with communications disrupted and roads impassable, coordinating relief efforts proved extremely difficult. Meanwhile, at Fukushima, the coming days would reveal the full extent of the disaster. Efforts to restore power to the plant were unsuccessful. Water levels inside Reactor 1 continued to rise. Steam pressure increased, threatening to rupture the containment vessel. The engineers decided to vent the steam manually using pressure relief valves. But approaching the highly radioactive reactor was extremely dangerous. No one wanted to volunteer for the mission. Eventually, a young worker named Katsumasa Ueda stepped forward. His bravery allowed vital steam to escape and brought the pressure down slightly, averting an immediate disaster. However, venting alone would not prevent a meltdown. Workers attempted to inject cold water into the reactor core. This would help lower the temperature. But introducing any additional water risked further pressurizing the containment vessel. Against all odds, the engineers managed to circulate chilled seawater into the reactor. For several days, they monitored the situation anxiously. Temperatures dropped slowly, but it wasn't enough. More water was needed. By this point, the crisis at Fukushima had become a race against time, a desperate bid to stabilize the reactors before their fuel rods melted through their containment vessels. With conventional methods failing, the engineers devised a risky plan. Fire engines would spray water directly onto the roofs of the reactor buildings. This unconventional tactic was used in conjunction with a system that pumped seawater into the containment vessels. Drop by drop, the workers lowered the water level and brought the pressure down, staving off a complete meltdown. Their Herculean efforts succeeded in bringing the situation under control, but the crisis was far from over. Temperatures inside the containment vessels remained high, and the plant's condition was precarious. Radiation levels were dangerously high. Most of the cooling systems were destroyed. Backup generators were limited, and new equipment had to be installed. Adding to the tension, explosions rocked the plant. Hydrogen gas had built up inside the containment vessels and ignited, blowing apart the steel panels. Of the 6 reactors, 3 were completely destroyed. Throughout this ordeal, Masao Yoshida's leadership proved instrumental. When rumors spread about the plant's instability, he informed the public truthfully and transparently, even though he risked being blamed if things worsened. He worked tirelessly, spending nights at the office, sleeping at his desk. His unwavering focus helped keep the crisis from spiraling further out of control. However, he always understood the dire straits they were in. "I feel like we're on a ship that sprang a leak," he said. "We're bailing out the water, but I don't know if we'll sink or make it." After 5 agonizing days, temperatures inside the reactors finally dropped below their fuel's boiling point. The cooling system, improvised though it was, had worked. The worst of the crisis had passed. But in the weeks and months ahead, the full scope of the damage would become clear. In the aftermath, it emerged that the tsunami had breached the seawall, protecting the plant by as much as 21 meters. Despite extensive damage to the facilities and equipment, not a single worker was killed during the initial crisis. But the impact of the disaster extended far beyond the plant. Radioactive material was released into the environment, forcing over 100,000 residents to evacuate. Large areas remained stuck for years due to high radiation levels. The economic toll was staggering, with insurance claims exceeding 300 billion yen. The Fukushima disaster prompted significant changes. Japan decided to decommission all of its nuclear reactors, relying instead on fossil fuels, which contributed to higher electricity prices. Stricter safety regulations were imposed on nuclear plants globally, and lessons were learned about the challenges of operating nuclear facilities in disaster-prone areas. But perhaps most important was the recognition of the courage and skill of the engineers and workers who prevented what could have been a far worse catastrophe. Masao Yoshida, the unsung hero of Fukushima, returned to work at the plant after the crisis, helping oversee its decommissioning. In 2015, he retired from Tokyo Electric Power Company, the utility operator. Today, the site of Fukushima Daiichi is a haunting reminder of the nuclear disaster and the extraordinary efforts made to contain it. But nature has begun to reclaim the area, transforming it into a poignant symbol of resilience and renewal. Among the ruined reactor buildings, birds soar, Fish swim in newly created ponds, and green shoots push through the soil. Life endures, albeit forever marked by the shadow of disaster.